So, but it's so wonderful to be with you here virtually. I wish I could have been there in person, but I'm in Vancouver. I just spoke at the No Tyrants rally out in Vancouver, and yeah, it was despite the rain, it was a brilliant turnout of people standing in solidarity across borders against Trump's rule and rising fascism around the world, and yeah, reclaiming our democracy and economy. So yeah, that was an exciting event. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for the invitation to speak here today. And I'm thrilled to be the new BC Greens leader with
Because my battery's dying, so I need my cable.
Oh,
That
sorry, are we all good on the audio end? Okay, excellent. Um, Yeah, it's been a whopping 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks on the job. But yeah, I wanted to spend a moment looking back. And my path to the BC Greens leadership actually began with Elizabeth May about 9 years ago, in the hard days following Trump's first election in 2016. I remember I was in a Via Rail car on a train odyssey across Canada with my course, and we were heading towards the capital to visit Parliament Hill. And I remember sitting in that rail car, and when those results came out, and I was slumped against my friends, just reeling with denial and disbelief. I don't know if you remember where you were when in 2016 when that was announced, but it was a formative moment for me as a young person because I realized that no one was coming to save us and that I needed to carve a new path and join forces with the young people around me to take hold of our future. And that sparked a conversation in that very rail car about turning the tide of the next provincial election with a wave of new youth voters. And I remember for the first time that night, I began to breathe more easily. It felt like a weight had been lifted. And I've been doing that ever since, trying to push through this sense of despair and weight of, as we grapple with our political context and join forces with others in the spirit of radical hope and action. And I remember another formative part of that very beginning was meeting Elizabeth on Parliament Hill the next day. I interviewed her and it felt like a shockwave of inspiration. And she placed genuine faith in my generation to stand up and make a real difference. And so, yeah, what followed was about 9 years of activism. I went on to lead a successful divestment campaign and led coalitions federally of climate, labor, and Indigenous nations, and you know, formed coalitions to stand against LNG expansion here in BC. I'm honestly in awe of the last, our 13-week campaign. It felt like a truly electrifying lightning rod of hope. And I think our bold progressive vision has really captured the imagination of a new generation of Green voters. We brought in thousands of new members to the party, many of whom were just completely disillusioned with politics. And I'm so grateful and impressed by the other candidates who ran, Dr. Jonathan Kerr and Adam Bremner Aikens. And I'm really excited to work all together to strengthen our party because that's how we win. And that's how Greens around the world have won more seats and influence. It is by building an intergenerational force and by tapping into the vast number of youth and non-voters who are fed up with the status quo and lesser evil options. And it's by building this thriving intergenerational movement with the experience and the energy to withstand any storm. And so over the last 13 weeks, starting in July, we had punched through, I think, a real sense of despair. As Premier Eby post-election last year has completely capitulated to conservative voters He's made it incredibly clear that he can take progressive voters for granted, he can take his union support for granted, and that he can chase the right and steamroll Indigenous rights and approve new pipeline projects under thin guise of economic sovereignty and Trump protectionism. And so, out of that rock and the hard place, we really punched through this sense of despair, through apathy and cracked through a beaming window of possibility. And I think right now we are building a formidable political movement that is strong enough to take on this province's billionaires, biggest polluters, and corporations that take far more than they give. And we saw that growth in very clear numbers. The BC Green membership saw unprecedented growth with thousands of new members, and youth under 30, this is my favorite statistic, increased by about tenfold. And I think that's a force to reckon with. The membership increased from 5,500 to about 10,000. And so we now have more active members than the official opposition, the Conservatives, and at this rate, we're on track to win record numbers of seats in the next election with real grassroots riding level organizing. And so in this time when democracy is in retreat around the globe, I'm just so encouraged to see young people in BC fighting back against this trend of apathy and disengagement. Because honestly, when I launched my campaign, it felt like a wild card experiment. I did not know myself, despite being someone who's been so deeply involved in these movements, that people would respond, that they would see themselves in the Greens, that they would see, that they would want to place their precious this precious sense of hope in a political party when many politicians and parties have given them every reason to turn away. And I think British Columbians recognize that the path we're on is a dangerous one. And we know that the BC Greens, the federal Greens, have the solutions, but we need to build back our political power to make them real. And sadly, the BC NDP, as many of you know, living on the island or on the islands in BC, they're not up to the task of defending our shared values or the province we call home. And they're making decisions based on scarcity and fear. And it's abundantly clear that we live next door to a growing authoritarian political movement that's funded by billionaires who exploit their workers and abuse our planet. And in stark contrast, we have a premier who just last month was jet-setting to New York to roll out the red carpet for Trump's inner circle of American oligarchs to buy and control even more of our province. And I think that really speaks to the dearth of political imagination in this moment with a governing party that is so captured by industry interests. And the NDP's grand idea to raise public revenue is to double down on raw resource exports, especially fossil fuels. No manufacturing, no innovation, and no real vision for the future beyond more foreign billionaires ripping and shipping our resources while families in BC wait for that wealth to trickle down. And we know that it never will. And while workers wait for fair wages and homes they can afford, we've seen this government just double down on MAGA-backed fossil fuel projects and ignoring the need to obtain consent from Indigenous peoples. And many other offenses to the most vulnerable members of our communities. And I think we're at this critical juncture, and it's important to breathe life back into what our power truly is as a party, both provincially and federally. because we need to rebuild our movement and leverage so we can negotiate from a place of strength. Because frankly, right now we're being asked to settle for pretty pathetic reforms and table scraps. Um, and it is essential that, we through these revived movements force the governing party back on the back foot. Um, because yeah, I mean, when we look internationally, when we look at what Carney's doing, um, it's easy to feel that sense of despair and defeat. But I have to maintain the conviction that the horrors that we are witnessing now are the death rattle of the old world, and this unbearable pressure that we feel is cracking the glass. We have to look for those cracks, and we need to force a new world through. And I know that together we can make our parties a force of nature, and we can be this unignorable beacon and a sharp and exciting vehicle. And the path to do it is increasingly clear. We need to unmask the greed of the billionaire class and all of the ways that they exploit and harm others to grow their personal wealth. And we need to, really mount the power of the 99% against this small sliver of society. And as this as we forge this path, we can build a plan to take back the public wealth that has been looted, with real taxation on the ultra wealthy and the largest corporations to pay for a climate and affordability agenda. So in BC and across the country, we can build on our massive advantage in renewable energy and create thousands of good green jobs so we can feed people healthy food and fight the commodification of housing and crucially rebuild our healthcare system, our education system. And I feel like, this is an incredibly exciting time for the Greens internationally. We're seeing breakthrough success of, leaders like Zach Polansky in the UK, who recently became leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. And, in his short time, he has effectively doubled and is on track to triple the membership of the party. I think they just surpassed 130,000 members in the country, and so and recently have pulled over and above the Labour Party. And so we're seeing this real seismic shift globally where the Greens are offering real solutions. We're joining forces with working regular people, with renters, with racialized Indigenous communities who are under the boot of these governments and these status quo politics. And we have real solutions on offer. And I think we're ultimately at the forefront of a powerful intergenerational movement that will reclaim BC's economy for working people, not billionaires and multinational corporations. And I think together, we can resist this faux nationalism, this fossil nationalism that Carney and Eby are running with, and we can redefine our national identity. We can build a resilient, thriving province that respects Indigenous sovereignty and our planetary boundaries. And so, yeah, I mean, thinking back like to that near decade ago with Elizabeth and in that Via Rail car, I learned that, the only way to shrink despair down to the only way to shrink despair down to a manageable size is by working together in a spirit of stubborn hope and action, and that we can and we must just punch through this stifling despair with real conversation, with real organizing and real solutions. So I'm so thrilled to be with you all and to be joining forces in sort of the resurgence of green parties across this country and around the world. And I hope you'll join us at the BC Greens Vancouver Annual General Meeting and Convention, sort of November 15th through 16th, which will kick off my inaugural month-long tour of the province. And I would love to have your support on this tour, to hear your advice, and to discuss the exciting futures of our green parties. I know this is just the beginning, and thank you so much for your time.